Let's talk about covert narcissism. So we all have heard of narcissism, narcissist, all that. I mean, it's a buzzword, right? But if you're like me, you only kind of think of narcissist as one type of person. And when I first was given the thought or given the idea to look up narcissist, because it might help me understand myself better, I was like, well, that's not me. I'm not the guy who's trying to be the center of attention, the life of the party. If anything, I'm the guy, blending into the background, trying not to be noticed. So, it really didn't make sense. But once I learned about covert narcissism, then it felt like it rung such a chord. It was like I was reading a description of myself. So let's talk a little bit about some of the characteristics that are most common in covert narcissists and maybe some of the distinction or how it works. That way you can understand it because I think it's useful, certainly. So um, there's a lot of the same sort of underlying or fundamental challenges or characteristics that the overt or the loud boisterous narcissist has that are similar. The covert narcissist just kind of expresses it way differently, so it's a little bit harder to spot, or maybe even a lot harder to spot. Certainly I've had people who, when I've told them that I've discovered I'm a narcissist, they're like, you're not a narcissist. But then when I tell them a little bit more about what a covert narcissist is, they're like, oh, well, yeah, that is you. Um, so uh, there's still a high focus on the self and a lack of empathy and some of those things, but they just display differently. So here's the most common kind of like characteristics of the covert narcissist. First is fragile sense of self-esteem, and I'm just going to tell you how that manifests in me because I think there's some similarities to most covert narcissists that I have. It may be somewhat different for you, but the fragile self-esteem works for me where I do a lot, or I have done a lot of sort of strategy and maneuvering to avoid getting criticism. And when I do get criticism, it lingers for a really long time in me. Now, I don't tell everybody about it. I don't go walking around complaining about it because that's not how I operate and not really how narcissists operate. But it affects me for a long time because I mean, that's sort of one of the fundamental issues and why we create this whole false self as a narcissist is to try to shield our fragile self-esteem from injury. And so that's a big characteristic. Being passive aggressive is another big one, and that makes sense because the narcissism is like covert. It's underground, and so but it's still causes dissatisfaction, anxiety, all these negative emotions. And so if you're not expressing those or really feeling them, you have to let some of that stress out somehow. And so often that shows up as passive aggressive. For me, in my family of origin, what I learned, I learned to be passive aggressive was making like cutting jokes. And when I was first, well, for many years, when I was first together with my now ex-wife, I would do that and she would get upset about it. And I would always say, well, it's just a joke, like somehow that made it okay. And it took a lot of rounds and finally me listening to her to realize that just because I think it's just a joke doesn't mean it's not hurtful to the other person. So I had to do a lot of like self-discipline and retraining to stop doing cutting jokes as much as I was. Now, I still find them coming out of me sometimes, but I'm a lot more disciplined about it. But that passive aggressiveness is really common in the covert narcissist. There's a sense of victimhood or chronic victimhood. And that one, when I first read it, I was thinking, I don't know that really aligns for me because I don't walk around like woe is me all the time. But how it manifests is I'm kind of like ahead of the game, meaning I'm constantly trying to maneuver and strategize and manipulate my world so that I don't end up being the victim of somebody else's perpetration. But then also, if I find that I've done something that, you know, that's harmful to somebody else, or in my case, most commonly, like not done something that I said I would do, I look to push the blame off on something else, some other circumstances, some other person, whether overtly or just subtly. And that's how it manifests as like this victimhood because I'm trying to avoid, you know, being the victim because I, at some level, believe that, you know, I am some sort of victim of circumstances or other people's input rather than the controller of my life. Envy and resentment. And again, these are all very subtle. If you had shown me these, like I said, a year or a couple years ago, I'd been like, I don't know, those I mean, I have some of those things, but not that big. It's only really been since I've really kind of taken these deep dive into like embracing that I am a narcissist and what that means, that I've really uncovered how some of these work. So envy and resentment for me works in a way of where I have trouble acknowledging other people's successes. And I don't necessarily find myself thinking like, oh, I wish I was like them, or oh, they suck because they're succeeding. It's almost like more like foundational or reflexive than that. And it's one of those things that's puzzled me over the years. Like, why, when somebody else comes to me with some exciting news, am I always trying to like downplay it? Like those people in your life who you come with exciting news and they're like right there with you, like building up. And I'm like, why am I not ever like that? But it's like, it just happens before I even get the conscious mind involved that I start trying to like bring a downer to their excitement. So that's how that shows up for me. Avoidance of accountability. That's real similar to what I was saying about the chronic victimhood thing. Just doing whatever I can to pass the buck on to somebody else, some other circumstances, something that's out of my control. Um, Emotional hypersensitivity. That's probably a funny one too, as far as, because the narcissist often doesn't seem like they feel anything at all. But that's another one, kind of like back to the fragile self-esteem thing, where it's like things that I take as an insult to my fragile self-esteem often will like carry with me for a while, and I'll ruminate on them. Not like in a big emotive way where I'm crying or like obviously angry or any of those kind of things. But it sticks around a long, long time, in ruminating on that type of thing. And then manipulative empathy is another really common one. And that one is like I didn't even know that that's what I was doing all these years, because I didn't know what empathy was. I mean, how would you if you never experienced it? And I'll tell you a quick story here that really rings true for me in terms of this idea of like, how would you know if you never experienced empathy? How would you know that you're not experiencing it? When I was a kid, I used to go to summer camps, and there was this one kid. His name was Roger. One year, and he was telling me how he can't smell. Like he was born without the sense of smell. And I thought that was interesting. I never heard of that before. You hear about people who are born blind or deaf, but some percentage of people are born without the sense of smell. But what was really interesting about it is that when he was telling me, he's like, yeah, I didn't know that I couldn't smell for like until I was like 5 or 6 or somewhere in there. And I was like, well, how could you have not known? Like, and he's like, well, people would be like, oh, here, smell this thing, and they'd, do that, and then they'd show it to me, and I'd do the same thing, and I didn't know that they were having a different experience than me. I just thought I'm doing what they're doing. I'm smelling, and they're smelling. It was only when he came to be like 5 or 6, when his reasoning mind was growing, that he suddenly realized that when he would smell like a rose, it would smell exactly the same as when he would smell like rotten garbage, where everybody else was like, oh, this rose is so great and this rotten garbage is so terrible. And then he was like, they smell the same to me. And that's when he finally discovered that he couldn't smell. So similarly, throughout my whole life, what I saw other people doing as far as what would be called empathy, I just tried to fake it. Like, and because I didn't know that everybody was different than me, or a lot of people were. I thought everybody experienced the world the same way, and they were just better at faking it. And that was like my failing, was like I wasn't very good at faking it sometimes. Sometimes I was good. So it's called manipulative empathy, and there is certainly manipulation to it because it's false, it's fake. But I'm making this long point about it because I think it's important to distinguish like what that manipulative really means in the manipulative empathy. It's not a desire to do something harmful to other people. It comes out of really a misunderstanding of how my brain and operating system has worked over these years, and trying to do what I can to, do whatever I think is needed in this situation that requires the empathy. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful. Those are the main kind of characteristics of covert narcissism. So covert narcissists like me, they do not look like your typical narcissist, where they like are always boasting about themselves or always trying to be the center of attention, because really those are not. It's almost like it's the opposite of those things to be a covert narcissist, and really understanding these different ways of being a narcissist helps really distinguish if that's what you got going on. Because once you know that, then you can start operating from the standpoint of that understanding. And we're going to get into a lot of those things in future episodes, how the brain works and different strategies and ways you can understand yourself better, and create, more satisfying life as a result. So, just sorry, I'm looking at my note here. So hopefully that was a useful little bite there. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel, give a thumbs up, post any comments or questions you might have about any of this, covert narcissism, anything that you've learned, because I'm happy to interact and learn from you guys as well along this journey that we're on together. All right, you guys take care. We'll see you next time.